The interesting thing about Neurosis, and a lot of interesting musical things about Neurosis, but it's not the musical that interests me, which I love their music. It's not the musical that interests me as much as, or nearly as much as, the musicians. And I've had kind of really compelling interactions with them as people over the course of time. But one of them I found. I find it interesting that I think that people who make the music, the kind of music that they make, are so tuned on an emotional level to the emotional level that it's really pretty astounding. I mean, I was going through some weirdness in my life, and at one point, the woman who is now my wife had some surgery and died on the operating table. They brought her back to life. But running up to this, it was something that I was concerned about. And as per my habit, didn't mention it to anybody really. I think I had been on tour with Scott Kelly, and he had maybe, as an aside, heard me talk about it with her or something on the phone in the hotel room or something really minor. I'm not of the habit of being obsessing publicly, vocally about personal miseries. Well, coming up to that Christmas and the holiday season, I get a call, or maybe it was an email or a text from Scott, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing on New Year's Eve?" And I said, "Nothing," which is pretty much my habit, not because I'm super antisocial really, but because, I'm the father of 3 and you just get out of the habit. It's amateur night. I don't need to be out there. So he said, "Listen, I want you to, Neurosis is playing a New Year's Eve show." And that's, to me, that's like the height, right? I've never actually played a New Year's Eve show. It's super, it's like, oh, yeah, I'm really happy for you, man. That's really cool. He goes, "Yeah, I'd like you to, do the countdown." They have the countdown, kind of MC. I'd like it if you could show up and do that. And I was like, he goes, "It would mean a lot to me," And I was like, all right. So get my act together, kind of go on out, meet the guys up there at wherever the venue was in Oakland. I don't remember at this point. And they hadn't played Oakland in such a long time. It was packed. I saw a lot of people and actually, left the evening. I did the 10, 9, 7, Happy New Year. And it was great. And I hung out and talked to folks I hadn't seen in a long time. And I went home, and it took me probably about 10 days, about 10 full days, dummy that I am, to realize they didn't need an MC. He didn't need an MC. Scott just wanted to get me out of the house, man. He wanted to keep me from hearing the whisper of the guns, He just, to have that kind of emotional intelligence, no wonder their music is as it is, And I've had, over the course of time, each and every one of those guys, I've had similar non-musical interactions that show me to a certain degree that they're paying a lot closer attention, to the world around them than people I know who get paid to do that, right? So, when Steve Von Till or something moves to, out into the woods, it becomes pretty clear why he has to, man. I don't think you could have that level of really aggressive empathy and be around people. It's actually the fact that I live in a suburban urban center here. This probably speaks to my callousness as a human being, that I could do so without being affected largely, but maybe I am. But I'm glad and to a certain degree blessed that I was able to see that in them. And I've known them for a long time. I remember when they came in to record in House of Faith Studios, which is, of course, where Oxbow recorded the first 2 records. And then where I had a store. So Bart, who ran House of Faith Studios, a roommate, friend, guitar player, and whipping boy, and we started CFY House of Faith, and CFY was the record store, record tape, T-shirt, video, guns, and tattoo store. And Neurosis had come to record there, and I really didn't, I knew them, didn't have anything to do with them. And at that time, they were a band from Oakland, but they were always nice to me then too. So, like my friend said, the people who were nice to you could fill a rogues gallery of killers and murderers, Manson and so on. But these guys were nice to me because they're nice and decent individuals, and have paid it forward in many different ways, in many different fashions. Between and betwixt many different people. So when given the opportunity to talk about them in tribute, I'm sure quite a few people would talk about their music, but I want to talk about the humans behind the music, or the musicians. And thanks for giving me the chance to do that.
Thank you, Eugene Robinson. That was a very kind story that he told.
Yeah, it was. I like all the different perspectives we're getting out of these testimonials.
I just thought he kind of speaks to the nature of something like you and I just only interviewing these guys. We don't know them on a personal level. It's kind of fun to hear that sort of aspect. So like Bill, having toured with them and things like that, to hear those kind of stories. So,
well, like what he mentions about the extreme empathy.
Yeah.
That's why Steve lives in the woods now.
Yeah.
And why, Scott lives in, in Southern Oregon, and like, you can't be around. I can kind of identify that to some degree, you can't be around that many people when you feel that much sometimes.
I have some students who are like that, and I think they get mischaracterized as like introverted, but I think they're incredibly empathic. And so school's very overstimulating for them. And so they're very quiet, but then I'll read their assignments, and they're so intuitive beyond and they don't speak a word in class sometimes, but that intuitive sort of quality comes out, and you're just blown away. Wow, they're locked into everything. But you don't know it because they don't speak a word or something.
They're that, as a long time as a kid, I was kind of the observer. I didn't really interact much in class. And I remember getting, for teachers' conferences, the teacher was he's not paying attention. He's drawing in the, doodling on his pages and whatever. And I was like, well, how are his grades? They're fine. It's what's the problem?
Well, there's all these expectations, I think, that you get kind of programmed in. And, as a teacher, I've fallen into that trap and kind of gotten guilty of sort of judging a book by its cover sometimes. But I am often also the teacher who will be in the teacher's lounge, and other teachers will be slagging on a student. And I'll think about oh, that kid's awesome for me. And I see that as a weird badge of honor almost, because it's that means I'm kind of tapping into the potential of that kid who's clearly either bored or just turned off and causing problems for other teachers. And so I don't know. I just shrug my shoulders. I'm yeah, I like that kid, and then I'll walk away because I'm sometimes the teacher's line is a den of negativity of complaining and things like that, and I can't handle that.
Yeah, that's to try to have a one kind of value solution for all these kids, how to teach all these kids the same way is that's a difficult thing to throw on anybody.
And it's not the fault necessarily, it's the industrialized model of education, and but at the same time, the frustration, we were just having this conversation, and maybe Steve will appreciate this as a fourth grade teacher, and how to differentiate for kids, when I have 6 classes with 15 or 20 kids in each class, it's different than if I'm an elementary teacher who I'm with the same 28 kids all day long.
Sure.
I can differentiate because I really do understand that Johnny needs this, and Susie needs this, and Billy needs this. I see the kids for an hour a day. And it's if I have 25 kids in a class, I can't differentiate for all 25 of those kids and then turn around an hour later and get 25 more kids and try, I can't.
Well, at the point of high school, I think if everything went right, people would kind of know what they needed by that point. It wouldn't quite be as specific, but that's not usually the case. But
you could be better, because we don't tailor the classes to the needs of the kids sometimes. It's because it's very much like assembly line education sometimes. I mean, you try and mix up the activities you're doing and do something different and give something visual and do something more active. But at the end of the day, like everybody's more or less doing exactly the same thing, and that probably doesn't serve everybody.
Yeah.
You're doing like, it's like utilitarianism. You're trying to like do the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people, but like some people are going to fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I had a history professor or teacher in high school who like kind of identified that I didn't like, or I didn't excel at writing essays. So he was like, "Why don't you do a comic for me?
Yeah,
Use that as an essay."
that's badass. Who was that?
Ferguson. Did you ever know him?
No.
Little short, redheadish dude. I don't think he was there for very long.
Yeah, I would say he must have been gone by the time I got there.
But yeah, he was great. So like that, I got to write a. Oh, we got some animals throwing up or something.
Oh, do we? Yeah, sweet. Well, you know, Steve talked about how people vomited at Through Silver and Blood concerts because of the
There you
visceral
go.
experience. I think they're hearing us talk about all these like deep subjects, and
It's pretty
like,
heavy for animals.
It's just
to deal
yeah,
with,
this
I
is
think.
too much for my fat cat and your neurotic dog.
Yeah,
So
ancient dog.
They
yes.
make like a kind of weird Tango and Cash kind of like tag team. Which, by the way, I watched Tango and Cash the
good.
other night. It's where
It's very of its time.
it is, but I feel like the opening of the other guys with The Rock and Samuel Jackson, where they like dive off the building and kill themselves, and then Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg take over. Like that's all based on Tango and Cash. Those guys thinking they're
Yeah.
invulnerable and all this like. Yeah.
Well, that and also Nice Guys. Have you seen that?
Oh, I love Nice Guys. Yeah,
that's Shane Black. I think.
Yeah, Shane Black.
But,
Yeah, but yeah. Anyways, I don't know how I got on that. Oh, we were talking about the tag teaming of animals and
Yes.
stuff. But yeah, so I just think education and kind of thinking about those kind of things is pretty fascinating. So, and then we heard about Billy Anderson's production a little bit, and then obviously before that we heard Locust Star and Purify. So we're kind of getting to really this is the big last crux of the album before we get to this very sinister, I don't know if sinister is the right word, unsettling ending. The last song, Enclosure in Flames, was that what it is? Yeah. I don't want to talk about that yet because it's not a experience of, I don't know. It's a weird song. So, but yeah, we're going to kind of get into some stuff here. We're going to get into the artwork a little bit too. So, I mean, do you want to talk about the artwork now, or do you want to talk about it kind of before?
Well, I talked to him about it a little bit. There was because I think the good thing, any kind of art, there's all kinds of interpretation you can get out of stuff, and especially on this record, if you look through the whole, here we go, the whole kind of like the iconography of the whole thing. What I thought that mask was, which we find out is like a Roman Legionnaire's mask.
Yeah,
I thought it was like a Buddha.
Interesting.
So with
yeah, it does kind of look like a Buddha.
It looks
almost.
like I used to have a National Geographic magazine that had one of the brass. Was it brass or it's not brass. What is what are statues made out of? Bronze.
Bronze
Yep. Buddha statue. So you've got like the Enlightenment, and then the blood could be, representative of humanity, and then the snakes. There's all kinds of different, like Buddhist things for snakes. Going back to Joseph Campbell, the snake is life throwing off the past. What was this thing? Oh, the serpent in Buddhism represents the power of life in the field of time to throw off death. The Buddha represents the power of life in the field of eternity to be eternally alive. And so I was like, shit, I was just listening to the Campbell shit. I was like, that really affects that a lot. But also like the serpent in Catholicism is, the forbidden knowledge to take you out of Eden and all this kind of thing. And the shedding of skin. There's so many like metaphors that you can get out of that cover. And I don't think any of them were incredibly intentional, but I think if they listen to Campbell, all the stuff, all these arcane, and they're into Jungian ideas.
Yeah.
All this stuff is like so
Collective
hardwired.
subconsciousness
Yes,
stuff. Yeah.
is so hardwired into us that like those type of things like really elicit like a visceral reaction.
I mean, that is kind of the nature of Jungian stuff, is that like,
The archetypes.
but you're also like, you're doing things because you're programmed into like a human connectivity that goes beyond culture, geography.
Yeah.
You're just part of this sort of collective thing that's interconnected when you're dreaming or whatever. Yeah. And so, yeah, even if it's not intentional to have these images and these metaphorical, symbolic sort of things, it's like they're compelled to still do them because they feel that there's something there, you know?
Yeah, there's like the, which they did in Enemy of the Sun with the Ouroboros, that's can be used in the, the serpent eating itself, the order and chaos stuff, like very like basic kind of religious kind of ideas that are thrown in this. I was looking into some metaphysical properties of silver. There's like this the psychic power of healing that's known with silver. There's biblical, like blood is a symbol of humanity and permanence. What I got out of through silver and blood was the chaos, order, and enlightenment. Could be a representation. That. Like I don't, and they don't really go into why all that stuff, but I like the fact that we can just kind of, it elicits this many kind of like reactions. Just like why people still talk about the Bible 3,000 years later is because you can interpret meanings out of it.
Sure.
And it applies to no matter what era of humanity we're in.
Yeah.
And I think those kind of powerful, iconic religious images really kind of benefit this record.
Yep.
I don't know if you've seen the reissue.
Mm-mm.
I've got the original CD, but I think it was 2015 Relapse reissued it on those like super huge, like Southern Lord thick vinyl things.
Yeah.
So it's just the snakes and the blood without the mask behind it. And it's kind of like losing a little bit of something with that, for me, but I don't know if there's like a legal reason why they didn't do that or.
Yeah. Were you part of any of the creation of the marketing for any of this record on some kind of level? Because you were at Relapse at the time.
I did some like the advertising campaign stuff where we basically just took images because they put the whole thing together themselves and sent it to us on as we discussed SideQuest drives for the people in their 40s and 50s that used to do graphic design. But yeah, we took some like the blood vessel images and stuff, and we'd use that as a backdrop and drop in all the different little thumbnails of what was coming out at Relapse at the time. Or I did a sticker that I still have one copy of. Yeah, that was kind of like a metallic sticker that had the Neurosis logo and the snakes, and then the blood vessel kind of background thing. But yeah, basically advertising is what I did, and we just kind of they sent us the stuff. We tweaked a little bit of it in a format to make it ready for the printer, and then shipped it off. Yeah, awesome. I mean, that's cool to be part of that on some level. Even if at the time you didn't know how big the record was. Yeah, like that. And I get to work on Amorphous Elegy. And, so it was neat. Most of the stuff that I did by myself was stuff that nobody wanted. So it was like Blood Duster Yeast, right? Blood Duster Yeast and Pica, and there's some Italian noise thing. I don't. Atrax Morgue. Oh, yeah. Was another one. Yeah. Just a lot of stuff that. I helped out with some of the other stuff, but like the art director gets the cherry pick, and that's who's the art director? Eric Horst. Okay, does he do anything creative? He's still a creative director at some point, but I mean, he hasn't been with Relapse for quite some time. Yeah, but I remember working on him with the just like talking about the more Elegy stuff than this. This was kind of already fully formed, but Elegy with like the handwriting and stuff in it, and that's a cool dealing with like the slides, and it was a totally different. The interesting part of this stuff, like this was all digital files, but a lot of the time we would get a slide. Mm-hmm. So you'd give them the slide to the printer that they would scan, and then you give them the coordinates where you'd wanted the text to go. You got an old dog coughing here, so apologize. There's a Peaceful podcast where, what the hell is his name? Basis for Anathema. Dave Pybus? Dave Pybus. Yeah. He was a graphic designer.
Yeah, he was the guy for Peaceville.
For
right?
Peaceville,
Yep.
and he does. If you're interested in the old graphic design techniques, he really goes into this stuff a lot. So but that was kind of the era where I was a graphic designer.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, and when we get into this next set of music, after we hear a little testimonial from Albert, where he talks kind of about the really Relapse and kind of the role of what this album did for, speaking of Relapse, and working there.
Yeah.
Kind of getting into some artwork, but we've got kind of a pair of probably the last two sort of epic gems of the record. I mean, you can make an argument for the final track, but I think that's altogether a different sort of song. But I think Strength of Fates and Aeon are kind of, when push comes to shove, Aeon might be my favorite song on the record. I don't know. Like it kind of moves and ebbs. It depends on what mood I'm in. It's kind of like some days I want Falling Slowly, some days I want Stones of the Sky. Like it's kind of its own thing. But Strength of Fates, I said no band in the realm of heavy music has ever had more emotional intensity in their quiet passages than Neurosis. Yeah. I just said that this is Exhibit A. You're 3 minutes in. I said I want to sort of crawl away or weep. This song just intimidates me. Those 3 minutes, and it's not loud. It's not heavy. It's just very. I said the song. The piano, the minor chord changes. It's just. I said it's like having your soul examined and reconstituted. Like it's really a powerful mirror.
See, these are the types of songs where when I hear, I can appreciate Opeth on a lot of levels, but they were kind of emotion light. Mm-hmm. They did the quiet, soft, contemplative, but there was never really anything behind it. Yeah, with Opeth.
But I think they're kind of more rooted in European music. Yeah, right.
And I think this is so. I don't know. Maybe we're spoiled by hearing this first. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this stuff is so it's so raw and honest that I don't know. I think that increases the level of how
sure,
how we kind of experience it more so than.
Did you ever
other things, but
dig around into any of the lyrics on this stuff or poke around at all?
Mostly on Locust. I looked through a little bit, but it wasn't.
This is the one where I said it's kind of an exploration of, I said kind of the fractured mind of a survivor. And I said whether it's an actual apocalypse or a metaphor for the hurdles of kind of personal apocalypse, addiction, depression, death, whatever that is, that the band or anybody is kind of, confronting it. I kind of think it's really in the eye of the beholder,
Yeah. I think that's why the lyrics and music work together so well. It's not like a blueprint of, here's what happened to me and here's how I got through it. It's it's a Joseph Campbell level mystery of here's the mythology of how we got through this together.
But I think there's something, the line, dust falls through my hands, dreams shatter away, burning glow turns to ash, thrown to wind. I mean, I just wrote fuck. It's just I mean, to me, this is the connective tissue. I said the anguish in these vocals is going to some dark places, and it connects to the Jira song that we heard in part one.
Yeah.
You see through me. This is that version of it. It's quieter, and the way that you see through me is acoustically driven and things. But it's raw scars. There's this thing. I didn't really look into it because I remember reading about it years ago when I was and researching Beatles history or something like that. But when the Beatles broke up and John was kind of hooked up with Yoko and really kind of getting into a lot of her weird stuff that she was kind of into, they started doing this kind of scream therapy. It has a more
primal scream therapy.
Is it primal scream therapy? Yeah. That's kind of what this
that was a big thing in the 70s.
Yeah, definitely. 70s was all about weird
Which,
S.
I think there's something to it.
Sure.
Have you ever been so frustrated that you just scream at the top of your lungs in your car?
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a certain type of release that you need to, that fulfills, there needs to be more to it than just that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and I mean, when the song finally kind of bursts open at 7 minutes, it's it's almost a relief.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, this, oh, finally, like, Jesus Christ, you know, I can't handle this, like, quiet, like, intensity anymore. It's like really freaking me out, you know? And then you just kind of get, here's what I wrote about Become the Ocean. Not much. I just said, you get 1 minute and 30 seconds to catch your breath. That's it. Before the heaviest song tears you to fucking shreds. And to me, Aeon is the heaviest song on the record. Through Silver, the title track has its moments, you know? Purify has that provocation of the Black Sabbath-y type kind of, you know, that thing. But to me,
this seems to be kind of the consensus track on a lot of
what's that, Aeon?
Yeah, a lot of people we've talked to.
It just seems like, the pieces kind of come together here. I just said when that 3-minute mark arrives, it's frightening. It's harrowing. The bass scales are amazing. I said the song decays into the darkest pits of emotional hell around the 5-minute mark. There's this doomy weight and anticipation. It's like a great horror film in a certain sense. It's like this inevitable part of a horror movie, this inescapable sort of thing where you know, like Cthulhu or whatever. It's like existential horror. There's nothing you can do to kind of like escape wherever the fuck you're at like that. You know, by the time you get to 6 minutes, it's fucking monolithic. You know, I think it was actually Justin Norton, I think, was commenting from Decibel, was commenting when Sarah Kitteringham did the interview with Steve, kind of talking a little bit about this record.
They did the Overkill Rewind for Banger.
Yeah, that's what it was. And he said, listening to that record is like trying to understand the monolith in 2001 Space Odyssey. And I thought, that's like, I get what he means by that. You know, like, I know I understand 2001 Space Odyssey like 70%. And I don't care. I still like it. It's still like an incredible experience. There's things.
I will continue. I mean, I listened to a 30-hour audiobook on it.
Yeah.
And I still am interested.
Yeah.
So that's the testament to
it. And that's what I'm going to get out of Neurosis records. Like, even though we dissected Sun That Never Sets like a few years ago, like I still can go back and like scratch the surface and, you know, peel some layers away. And like, I just feel like I'm just kind of still digesting a record like this. And Aeon is a song that, I don't know, I'm going to probably continue to try and figure it out for years. You know, like every time I hear it, I'm going to hear it differently. Like you said, you were trying to listen to this album in like kind of different experiences and things like that. I just said, you know, when Steve talks about like shamanist spirituality or a shamanist like ritual or incantation, this is it. Yeah. You know, for me, you know, it's heavy in the ways that this genre wasn't before this point, you know, whether it's the layers of sort of violins like that kind of fade in. It's tribal once again, kind of like the opening track. I said the song kind of decays in a certain sense, the way it sort of, it decays the way it entered. It decays out kind of in that way. And that's something that they'll do more and more in the future. I think this is like the first time they really start to perfect it. Yeah,
like the Sun That Never Sets, Literal Decay, which is one of the most amazing fucking...
Or Stones of the Sky. Yeah.
But that album.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, Chris Force, the stuff she's doing on violin, and I'm kind of bummed because I reached out to Chris and I never really kind of heard back. You know, she's interviewed in that Decibel Neurosis issue, so you know, she's kind of weighs in on some stuff there. But what I kind of get out of this is some of the avant classical music that Mike, our old manager, sort of turned me on, like Toru Takamitsu, who did like some Kurosawa films and some other things. I hear some of that in this. Morton Feldman, he's like another kind of guy.
The modern classical
like atonally
thing is it's a very small genre.
Yeah, exactly. But if you get it, like you really get it. You know, it's
Philip Glass kind of thrown in there too.
Yep, for sure. There's some of that, and I think those are the kind of guys that, like, if we circle back to the opening of part one, that like John Cale was drawing from, right? Like he, you know, the atonal kind of thing. So it's like a funeral march at the end, and it's kind of takes you on this like logical conclusion. The only place you can be at the end is this sort of funeral march. I just said I'm kind of exhausted by this point, and I can understand why people can't understand or can't handle this record. Like, if you're not ready, and if you like truly like absorb this, like it can, you know, I get it. Like,
I'd like to listen to this in a sweat lodge.
Yeah. That'd be fucking
do
cool.
do some mushrooms, or do some nice hallucinogens that don't make you throw up too much.
Yeah.
And listen to this in the dark, maybe with a couple of your friends that really dig this record as well. And like that, those are my best psychedelic experiences are with good music and good people.
Sure. Yeah.
And having, not just for, fun, but you want some type of experience out of it. That's the whole point. We're always, as human beings, we're always like reaching for some type of like spiritual experience that we can't get here. We need something else to get there.
Sure.
So like music can do it, trance can do it, dance can do it, drugs can do it.
Yeah.
Those are probably about it.
Yeah, sure.
That I can think of. But
I mean,
the most productive ways are through probably ritual and, meditation.
The only thing I can get you is divorced Uncle Dan Godfather Mansion sauna. If we could get access to that, we can have a low rent.
I was thinking about making my own sauna in the backyard.
Yeah. If you figure out how to do that, let me know, because I might pay you to build one here, because I'd be.
Well, I've got that little shed thing
little shed.
I'm going to make, but I've got a little wood burning stove in there.
And
then you go in there and then you go jump in the snow and just avoid the dog shit, and you're okay.
That's the key. Avoid the dog shit. Yeah. No, there's a lot more I could probably say about Aeon, but it's just, I don't know. This is just it's a great song. It's awesome. Yeah. It's not as immediate as Locust Star. You got to really, lock in, but it goes some cool places. So let's get into it. We're going to hear from the band talking a little bit about the artwork after we hear from Albert from Decibel.
If you're into SideQuest drives, make sure you hang on to this.
Yeah. And again, I will thank, it's kind of a special shout out to Albert, because Albert kind of helped us actualize some of this episode a little bit.
He's always got a good, sometimes he throws you something, you're like, what?
Yeah.
And like, oh, that was the right call.
Sure. Well, even not just this, but like just the fact that he got me, I reached out to Steven Scott through Facebook, which is kind of, I don't know how much bands are on their personal
Sure. Yeah.
And I kind of told Albert what I was trying to do here, and he got me in touch with Aaron Turner, got me Steve's email to like reach out. So,
he helped out with the hard and heavy, so it's like,
he facilitates
gives us that little
things.
token of legitimacy to be like, oh, okay, we'll talk to these guys. That's
yeah.
So we appreciate it.
I think he knew what we were kind of trying to pull off, and that was really cool. So just kind of shout out to him.
He said he enjoys listening to our shows when he goes grocery shopping.
Yes, there you go. Hey, Requiem Metal Podcast, we're there to get you through the pain of grocery shopping. So,
well, with our last finished show, it's probably taking about a
good.
month to
it's going to be a
but
lot of grocery shopping. Yeah.
Go to Costco, man.
This is going to take forever. If he wants to ever get through that thrash metal series, he's going to really have to work hard. So we're going to go from there into the interview with artwork. Then we got Strength of Fates, Become the Ocean, Aeon. Then we're going to come out and talk a little bit about Peers, Neurosis. So enjoy.
When people talk about Through Silver and Blood, they rightly talk about the fact that it was kind of a coming out party in terms of visibility for Neurosis. Having signed a Relapse after spending time on Alternative Tentacles, it really exposed the band to a new audience. But what I think a lot of people fail to recognize is what that in turn did for Relapse. Back in 1996, Relapse was still a label regularly releasing Mortician material. And sure, they had the Release Entertainment sub-label, but that always felt like more of a boutique thing that lacked any real ability for meaningful crossover into the metal world. But within 2 years of Through Silver and Blood's release, Relapse had now either signed or released material from Today is the Day, Brutal Truth, Unsane, The Dillinger Escape Plan, Coalesce, and they weren't far away from releasing something from Converge, actually, either. So I think it's important to note that while this record obviously changed the landscape for Neurosis as a band that had a real connection to the metal world, it also really impacted Relapse as a label that people thought of more than just another metal label.
But I know, Mark, you wanted to ask, speaking of kind of the construction of this, Mark's going to probably tell you, but he was working at Relapse actually right when you guys got signed.
In 96. I remember getting the SideQuest drives of the artwork.
SideQuest drives, yeah.
Yeah, and we made that artwork ourselves with a primitive Macintosh computer, whatever.
Probably Photoshop 1.
Yeah, or
Probably.
whatever. Yeah.
Right, like it was like if you wanted to render a filter or a plug-in, I guess they call them now, on the very small low res image, you'd have to go like make lunch waiting for that filter to.
Yeah, I used to, for Gaussian blurs,
rendering.
I'd go smoke a cigarette and come back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Was the process fairly collaborative with everyone, or was anyone kind of more technically savvy, or was everybody kind of
We
in
all
the process?
dove in, man. Like I bought the computer. I think it was a Power Mac 8100 or something like that. Like it was like my first kind of personal computer purchase, and we took it to the studio with us while we were recording, and that's where we were working on the artwork. You know, we bought a scanner, and we bought a SideQuest drive and a bunch of SideQuests. I think they were the 50 megabyte ones then, and when they upgraded to the 100 megabyte ones, we were blown away. Or was it 44 and 88, something weirder like that? But we were all sitting there taking turns, like working on the image, because we were teaching ourselves the Photoshop program. We didn't have any training or knowledge of it. We were just screwing around.
Were the cover images, were those fairly intentional, or was that kind of what was the idea behind the cover? Did you guys have like an idea you were setting out for, or was this you kind of like it kind of came as you're putting it together? Because it seems very intentional to me now in retrospect.
I kind of think it came together.
I think so. I think we definitely didn't have that part figured out. I think we had some artwork or some,
we had that mask image, like the mask image.
But where did that even come from? Like
it was from the front cover of a book. I had somewhere. It's a Roman mask. It's some historical book.
And then Pete, our visuals guy, I think he had the book with the snakes and skeletons of snakes, and it wasn't two intertwining like that. It was one that he flipped the image and moved one over the other and created that. But all of that was happening just in the little room off to the side while we were recording.
Yeah, and that was tricky because you had to figure out how to make the snake appear to be above and below itself, and cutting out the layers and then adding the blood to the eyes just to kind of make the title more literal.
Yeah. Speaking of that, what is there an explanation for the title that you guys want to discuss, or is that something you want to kind of leave to interpretation?
I think we could leave that one for interpretation.
Okay.
It reminds me, I just got done teaching my Bob Dylan unit with my rock history class, and my kids were always frustrated because they'll be like, "What does this song mean?" I'll be like, "I don't know. Bob Dylan won't tell you either." And I think they kind of dig that. They're like, "Oh, okay,
Yeah,
hard,
here, kids,
hard
here's a hard rain's going to...
Yeah, exactly. It's not nuclear war. It's just a hard rain.
Yeah, that's... funny you mentioned that, because I was thinking the other day about how I believe there's a new poet, Yannicka Stuckey, who is described as an ecstatic poet. Third Man Records put out his book, and I was thinking back on that, and I've read only a couple other poets that I think are ecstatic poets, and I believe that Hard Rain Is Going to Fall is an ecstatic poem. That's like total trance state, stream of consciousness, mystical wisdom in that song.
Without a doubt. I split the class up into three, and 1/3 gets to analyze the lyrics to Only a Pawn in the Game. Another does Only With God on Our Side. And then the poor third group gets Hard Rain, and they're always just like, I could just see their faces. And eventually I come over and I'm like, okay, let's talk about some context, Cuban Missile Crisis. And then they go, oh, I said, and again, I don't know, but run with it, So, I mean, these poor kids didn't think they were doing poetry analysis in a rock history class, but hey, screw them,
Exactly.
It's good for them.
We even ignited the first atomic bomb on the day commemorating the transfiguration of Christ, thus unconsciously signaling that we intended likewise to transform the world not only after the light, but after the darkness. The blast that burned several times hotter than the surface of the sun.
gearing into Through Silver more specifically, when you guys made this record, did you guys feel like you had any musical contemporaries that were making similar kind of music, or did you feel like you were in an island unto yourself? I mean, I've heard you mention maybe like thinking that maybe Ministry or Skinny Puppy or industrial metal people might be India, or did it really, or was it not maybe until like ISIS and Converge and some of those bands kind of crested in the late 90s where you're like, oh, okay, well, there's others like us or who we can hang out with or whatever, you know? I guess, did you know that you were alone, or did you feel like you were part of something?
We were musically pretty aware of how alone, like how we were the odd band on any bill. And that's because we weren't alone in terms of our sort of scene of other, you know, like we were part of a whole cool DIY punk youth culture that was very vibrant, and a lot of time spent with a lot of people that were really important to us were part of that scene, even though they were playing much more straightforward punk rock music, you know. But musically, it was pretty clear that we were outsiders, and we were playing music that was not for everyone else, you know? Because
I think, Steve, I've read somewhere where you talked about how, like, even journalists from, like, Maximum Rock and Roll were kind of like, we're kind of done with you guys now. You're not part of what we want to be writing about. Well, and so it was like a weird, like, you guys, like, didn't know where to go, maybe. That's what I'm kind of curious about.
Yeah, so we, you know, we came from obviously the DIY punk scene in the Bay Area, and that actually is who we are. That's formed exactly what we do to this very day. But there did become a point where musically, some people came along with us for the ride, like our closest friends or an open-minded people. But a lot of people were like, like the second we got keyboards, like, you know, I don't know how that's not punk to have keyboards. I mean, what about Killing Joke and the Stranglers? Yep. But people were like, what the fuck, Faith No More? You know, or like really kind of like they only wanted the hardcore, you know, and they weren't open-minded enough to take it with us. And we were way too weird for the metalheads because we weren't doing jiggas and guitar solos. And it was a really weird time. And I think we were not, you know, we were too human and not mechanical enough for the kind of like second wave industrial stuff. So, you know, we kind of hoped to find somebody out there somewhere that liked us, but we were really alienated. And that when you mentioned Maximum Rock and Roll, we were in England and we had signed to Alternative Tentacles Records. This was Souls at Zero Enemy. I don't remember exactly which tour it was. And Tim Johannan, the main Maximum Roll guy, and a guy we were friendly with enough to like have basketball competitions with, was like, no, you guys can't advertise in our magazine because you're progressive rock. You're like, yes.
I hear like, a little owner of a heart in Aeon and stuff.
Yeah, I fucking hate you.
Ouch.
I'm just kidding.
Exactly. I mean, Jason likes yes, but
there's nothing wrong with prog rock. Yeah.
Well, that can be debated. But
I guess I think of like King Crimson and stuff.
I'll take them. I'll take them as the exception. It depends on which album we're talking about. But King Crimson, Red.
We'll go Red. We'll go Red.
But
Discipline.
Lark's Tongue.
Lark's Tongue.
Singular band.
Yes, there you
go. We definitely felt that we didn't have a home. And so our whole, that's why I think Guar was the first band to ever take us out as a support act. And as ridiculous as that might seem, like in this day and age, that was our only chance to play in front of people that weren't just going to show up for us, based on whatever we had done in the years previous. And that was huge. And so we went and played in front of, 1,500 people a night wanting to get blood and cum sprayed all over their face by monsters.
Yes.
And really what we learned then is, we're not gonna win the crowd, but we're going to find the few freaks in the back that were looking for something and didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
And with that's why we embarked on later things like Pantera and Ozfest and things like that, is if we can just find those few freaks. I mean, we all know what it's like to be the young person, and we're lucky to have grown up in the Bay Area where there was something to find and latch onto in the local community. But, people out in Indiana or,
we were in northern Michigan, and we basically had to just listen to European death metal, to find anything, and there was nothing around us,
Yeah. So, so to go with any sort of act that had any sort of reach meant that maybe we'll find those people looking for something deeper, and to this day, I think Noah would agree that we love playing these, pop festivals in Europe almost more than we like playing ones that all the bands are kind of analogous, because you've got that chance of finding somebody totally unsuspecting.
I think you guys are interesting in that I know a lot of people who aren't into metal at all, but they listen to you for whatever that is. They find something that you guys transcend kind of the limitations of what a lot of people think that genre is supposed to be. And so I can see how playing those type of festivals could be really appealing because those people exist.
Yeah.
I mean, my first time seeing you, I don't know about Mark, it was seeing you guys open for Pantera when I was in high school. And, I was into it, but I was still too young to process everything. But I remember seeing you guys open for Pantera, and I believe it might not have been the same show, but I saw I Hate God open for Pantera, and everybody was booing except for us. We were in the very back, and we were losing our shit over I Hate God, and we realized, we probably don't belong with these Pantera fans. But we didn't know that at the time. We were just high school kids going to see Pantera, and Deftones were there, and I Hate God. But we were almost more interested in what was coming before Pantera, and that was a big light bulb moment.
That was the eternal thing with us for years. We went for the opening band and left.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were those freaks in the back. There you go. So you got
right
us.
on.
That was Aeon, Become the Ocean, and Strength of Fates. And
not the Duel of Fates.
Not the Duel of Fate. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, no, that's...
John Williams.
No. I just did the...
I don't remember how it goes, but that was the only memorable thing from that movie.
That was the lightsaber battle with Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul.
That's where Maul gets cut in half, right?
Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, it had choir in it, too.
Yeah.
Exactly. Can you think of anything that came from Rise of Skywalker? No. Unfortunately, the last Star Wars Williams score that you can't remember a single note out of it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, you're right.
So luckily we have this Neurosis record to
there
take
you
the
go.
pain away.
Yeah. Where we want to go from here is to be a very short set because we got a very long kind of piece kind of sort of coming up here. But I felt that, there were people that I think we needed to probably talk to pull this episode off. We heard from Bill from Mastodon. I think that was kind of crucial. I reached out to Jacob Bannon, emailed him and stuff. I thought he would have been kind of a good linchpin because I think there's a lot of Converge, Neurosis kind of crossover-y stuff. And
especially emotional.
Steve's been on some of those records and things like that. But it is what it is. The people are busy. People don't check their emails. But luckily I was able to get in touch with Aaron. And Aaron, of course, from Hydra Head. I think Hydra Head has a lot of the spirit of Neurosis, and he talks a little bit about that.
Yeah.
The DIY, I'm not. Aaron will tell you in a second. But I think from a personal sort of angle, like ISIS helped me. I think I mentioned this in part one. Sort of figure out how to access Neurosis in a way. Because ISIS, I kind of started to get into in college when I was really starting to explore and expand my musical horizons a little bit more. And I think I was finally mature enough to be able to, through ISIS, get counteractively, really start to absorb Neurosis. You know?
Yeah. They might be one of the only bands out of that era that really kind of really push stuff. Like I'm still surprised at how far they kind of went with everything on Ipecac and pushing out of that whole genre. Like them and
they got a song on. I even talked about it, but I think it might be a bonus thing that we'll throw up for Patreons about Friday Night Lights. I asked them like how the fuck did you get like one of the most famous sequences of that whole show? It's a ISIS song, it's somebody on that show was hip to something,
But yeah, they definitely they carried on that torch. Them and I think Keelhaul carry on that Neurosis torch pretty well.
Sure. Pelican too.
Those. But as far as like stuff that I think I still have some connection.
Yeah, I'm just talking about bands that kind of blew up with that
sound.
There was
a ton that did. Yeah.
Yeah, the Neurosis sound was like a term for like a little while. Whatever you want to make of that, I don't know.
Which in retrospect, it's not as like obvious as we thought it was.
No. The more I pull apart Neurosis and like ISIS and even like Jezu and some of those, they're all doing their own kind of thing.
Yeah, they're just they had kind of the same mindset about ideas of repetition and kind of singular visions, but they didn't really. None of them sounded alike.
Is it fair to say that like the same kind of the same misnomer of like the Peaceful Three?
Yes,
it's kind of
it's something journalists put together. Like, the Peaceful Three they weren't even on this label at the same time together.
Yeah,
so they're just like conveniences of.
But I think there's something that is connected between those bands in a weird way, but they're all completely singular and completely doing their own like version.
Yeah,
of it,
you can create a narrative there.
Yeah,
but there wasn't really one. But it was like, okay, the British Doom thing. Here's three guys that are doing a different take on that.
Sure. I mean, you could say the same thing, Godflesh and Neurosis or something like that.
Yeah.
Like I don't think they're the same thing at all.
I think if you're clever enough, you can make a connection between anything.
Yeah, sure. Well,
if anybody watches,
we tried that in part 1, Mark. We'll see if it worked.
If anybody watches YouTube, there's people that make careers of talking about fucking Lord of the Rings shit and pontificating about superhero shows and shit. People really like to find connections. That's a fundamental human thing.
Sure. Well, that's where conspiracy theories come from. Is trying to like.
Well, it comes from the CIA, but the term. But
Davos, what are you inhaling? He's cocaine.
I got to leave my cocaine at home and I'll leave it on the floor for him. Lost my train of thought now.
CIA. I don't know.
No, we like as humans, we like to find patterns.
Yes,
and we like to see. It's like an innate survival mechanism that if we're like in the Serengeti and we see something that looks like a predator, we get the fuck out, or we need to see that kind of stuff. And I think it makes us make the world make sense if we can find patterns and things to like stuff that doesn't seem like it should have a rhyme or reason.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's just like an innately human thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well said. So let's get into it. We got Aaron Turner, and then just for the sake of acknowledging it, I think especially early ISIS kind of sometimes match that rage and fury that Neurosis kind of has as well. Eventually, as you mentioned, ISIS kind of goes off and really sort of carves their own, almost more Mogwai-ish and Slintish, and they're kind of exploring some of those kind of aspects a little bit more.
I think that might have been the third or fourth decibel illustration I did.
Was ISIS?
Oh, it was just Aaron Turner screaming at the guy in the face.
That's very cool. Yeah, that would be cool for Aaron to know that.
Back with the shaved head and the sideburn.
Yeah, he remembered. I think he remembered Eclipse when I asked him about it.
Okay, and I got to I did them with Old Man Gloom.
Oh,
recently,
perfect.
With the bearded long hair version. So,
but probably because we did interviews with Hydra headbands back when back in those days and stuff. So, but so for that we have from their debut EP, the Mosquito Control EP from '98, Poison Eggs, which is great song. So enjoy the Aaron Turner interview, Poison Eggs. Then we'll come back and say our goodbyes and close out through Silver and Blood.
What your kind of earliest connection with Neurosis as both kind of a fan and maybe like a young musician, like where you first kind of came into contact with them and maybe like early influences that you could start to glean from them, I guess.
Sure. This was in the pre-internet days, so all music at that point was word of mouth. And I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which was a fairly small town. and there was very little going on in terms of an underground scene. There was a number of people who were very active, and it was very close knit. But as I said, it was quite small, and shows were few and far between. Mm-hmm. And most of the music that my friends and I encountered was handed down from some of the older folks in the scene, as well as older siblings. And so that was where Neurosis first came to my attention. There was a guy who was part of our circle of friends who was always wearing a Neurosis shirt. It was the classic yin yang design.
Oh yeah.
And I remember seeing that before actually hearing their music. And after talking about Neurosis with him, it turned out he was one of the guys who really just liked the punk era of Neurosis. And he was like, new Neurosis is no good. And by new Neurosis, at that point, he meant anything from like Souls at Zero onwards. Yeah. And I kind of ignored that little nugget from him there, and I ordered Enemy of the Sun, regardless of his advice, or I should say his warning to stay away.
Yeah.
And I remember the day it came in the mail, and I put it on my parents' stereo, and I just laid on the couch and listened to it and let it wash over me, and it had an immediate impact. At that point, I was getting into hardcore and punk, but I was still very much a metal kid at heart. I really liked things that were dark and heavy and more oriented towards metal, and Neurosis seemed to be just about the darkest and heaviest thing I'd ever heard at that point. And I quickly realized that my friends had, warning about new Neurosis not being good was completely false. Shortly thereafter, there was a band from Santa Fe called Logical Nonsense who were on Alternative Tentacles.
Okay.
And they did a tour with Neurosis, and they all came back with Enemy of the Sun tour merch. And I remember it being a big deal that a band from our hometown had left and gone on tour, and had gone on tour with Neurosis. So that was, again, where, this wider world was touching our small scene and had a pretty big impact on where we were at. And at that point, I was still in high school. I had not found anybody to be in a band with. I mean, several of my friends and I had messed around, but we didn't have a drummer or a bass player amongst us. So it was basically like a guitar player and a couple of people who wanted to be singers. So there was nothing really to work with there. But I left New Mexico after graduating high school and moved to Boston, and that was where I really started trying to form bands for the first time in any real sense. And Neurosis was certainly one of the primary influences I was considering at that point. Their music had meant a lot to me, and being able to finally see them after moving to the East Coast had a big impact. I remember the first time I saw them was before Through Silver and Blood came out, but not long. I think it was sort of at the tail end of their touring for Enemy of the Sun, but they were already playing material from Through Silver and Blood, and they were doing their Tribes of Neurot set after the Neurosis set itself was completed. And I saw them at a club on Lansdowne Street in Boston, and it was, I think it was an 18-plus show. I was only 17, but somehow I got in and was very thrilled by this. And it just, it was a small club, not a huge audience, and the show left an indelible impact on me. The visuals, the intensity of the performance, the transition from the sort of more traditional band approach to the more abstract Tribes of Neurot set at the end, all of that really just, it sunk in, and it opened up a doorway for me where I could see that a band could be more than a band. It was more than just a group of dudes playing guitars and rocking out. I mean, it was really a full experience in every sense of the word. And, that led to me becoming even more devoted to their music and kind of delving into their world and realizing that there was also this whole set of ethics that went along with it, this very familial approach to doing things, and deeply embedded in the DIY mentality, and all of that had a lot to do with how I formed the label and how I chose to operate as a band member. And obviously the music itself also had an impact.
My next question was like the influence that Neurosis kind of directly had on bands like ISIS or Sumac or just really the sonic kind of landscape that I really like you guys with Hydra Head, especially like you sort of operated a really interesting niche. You know, I remember this is right when I was kind of starting to get, you know, involved with Eclipse, and I was starting to work at a record store. So I was getting service from Hydra Head and just really like the eclectic nature and sort of the art aesthetic, you know, both the cover and like how unique a lot of those bands were. Like, I don't know, is that somehow connected to some of the things that you gleaned from like seeing Neurosis and thinking about Neurosis and kind of their approach, or is that like a stretch too far? Okay.
No, not at all. That was definitely a facet of it. I mean, going back to, I know we're talking about Through Silver and Blood, but going back to Enemy of the Sun, I remember looking at the cover that John Yates did for that and really appreciating the design aspect of it. And it was clear to me that Neurosis had a visual presentation that was very important to them. And that was something that was also important to me with Hydra Head. I definitely wanted to have a label that was visually cohesive and paid a lot of attention to those graphic elements of what we were doing. And, you know, it wasn't so much their graphics specifically that were inspiring to me. It was more just that they had a totality of their vision, and it was very clear that every aspect of what they did, from their live show to their recordings to their album sleeves to their merch, all came from this very strong aesthetic sense of what they wanted, and that they wanted it to be this very unified presentation. And that was definitely the approach I wanted to have with Hydra Head and also at ISIS, where it wasn't just kind of this scattered thing. It was very much, as I said, a cohesive vision of presentation from top to bottom, where every single aspect of it was thought out thoroughly. Certainly they weren't our only point of reference, but it was a strong one. And there was another aspect of what they were doing, which I touched on earlier, where there was this very familial vibe to what they were doing, where they brought the same people on the road all the time. And later when they started Neurot, they would tour with bands and then subsequently release records by them. And it seemed like it was very much oriented towards this underground family of people who all had, at least in some ways, a common vision and common interests and common needs. And that was also what we were trying to foster with Hydra Head. A lot of our bands toured together. ISIS toured with a lot of the bands on Hydra Head. And, you know, that idea that you work with people you trust and you work with people where there is a mutual belief in what each other is doing. And all of it is built on this foundation of family and friendship. That to me was very important, and certainly a part of that is what I learned from kind of watching Neurosis from afar and then getting to know them later when we toured with them, when various projects of mine released records on Neurot, and also when Hydra Head was able to do some smaller scale vinyl releases with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I forgot you guys kind of had some of those kind of personal connections and stuff between the two of you guys.
Yeah, there was a lot of overlap over the years, and it actually continues to this day. So, you know, again, that kind of just points back to what I was talking about, where these kind of connections that you make with people on a personal level end up having a big impact on the creative life and vice versa.
Sure. I mean, I definitely, when I started kind of thinking about putting the show together, and I talked to Albert from Decibel, who kind of really helped me give me some emails and kind of get the ball rolling, you were the first name that like I kind of thought of outside of Steve and Scott and those guys, because I was, you know, I mean, I'll be honest, the first time I saw ISIS, you guys helped me get back into Neurosis. Because I heard, I'm a little bit younger than you. I graduated high school in 97. So when I heard Through Silver, like I got it, but I didn't. I wasn't like in that like right place. And then like a couple of years later, you know, I heard first, Celestial and Mosquito Control, I started to hear that stuff, and then it got me interested in that sound. And then I kind of started to go backwards and go, oh, okay, now I'm getting Neurosis through ISIS almost. So it was kind of a cool circular motion that I went backwards from that. And I guess my next question would be is, you talked about the impact on Hydra Head, but obviously there's a direct musical connection too from Neurosis into what you guys did originally with ISIS and what you've done with other bands through the years. What kind of things were you kind of taking from Neurosis? Because you guys are always kind of lumped together. There's this kind of weird, connection that you guys will probably always have, but from metal historians and journalists and things like that. So I guess speak to that, what is the connection that they had on you guys musically besides just the aesthetics?
Right. Well, there was a number of things. As I said, we were coming from the realm of hardcore, and at that kind of at the forefront, in certain ways, the harder, heavier aspects of metal were also there in the background. And for me, that was also, as I mentioned earlier, one of the big things that drew me to Neurosis. They were clearly coming from a punk background and a punk mentality, but their music was in many ways very metal. It was not the fast-paced punk that they started with. And the fact that they were using these really slow tempos and tuning down and using these really dissonant chords was it was a very potent combo for me, because it kind of took what I loved about the metal that I grew up on and just pushed it to a really dark and experimental extreme. And their use of texture within their music was also really important to me. The fact that there was a lot of samples incorporated, but also just the way that the instruments work together. Often it was more important, the rhythm and almost the feeling and the atmosphere was more important than anything having to do with harmony. And there was also this willingness they had to kind of dissolve their structures and just have them morph into these walls of just enveloping noise, basically. That was really satisfying for me as well. And that was part of what led me to this, a deeper interest in electronic and ambient and noise music, was that, that was present in what they were doing. And there was times when there was a lot of space and within the songs, and they never rushed anything. So all of that had an impact on me as a songwriter, and it was also important to varying degrees for the other members of ISIS as well. I think when we started, there was a few bands who were kind of the common ground for all of us. Neurosis was one, Godflesh was another, Swans were another, Melvin's, early Helmet. So it was kind of a cross between the realm of doom and crust and maybe some of the am rep noisy stuff. Yeah, and I mean, I'm fine with the fact that we were compared to them and continue to be associated with them, and it's undeniable that we wouldn't have been the band that we were and the band that we became without having had them as pathfinders, essentially. Kind of leading the way, and I learned a lot from them, not just musically, but as I said, also from a more practical sort of administrative aspect. And I think it would be hard to find a young band that comes out with their own completely unique and fully formed aesthetic. And the fact that we used much of what Neurosis was doing as our template, I think, set us up in a good way. I mean, what better band to draw influence from than a band who, continually pushed themselves, were very clearly unique, and had a willingness to experiment. I mean, I would much rather have been taking pointers from a band like that rather than, a whole set of bands that were just content to recreate what had come before them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I feel like that was a very good learning experience for us.
Yeah, and it seems like that in hindsight, as you kind of were talking and putting some of those pieces together, it seems like Neurosis kind of had this like patron saint quality to a lot of the sort of Hydra Head Boston sort of scene. You know, obviously, you know, your Cave-Ins and your Converges and a lot of those bands, like even though they're all doing different things, you can almost trace back like a Venn diagram, and you can definitely put Neurosis there and the Swans and, you know, some of those bands you kind of mentioned. So it's interesting how different bands took lessons from Neurosis, but kind of ran in different directions.
Yeah, and I mean that's always the thing. That's always the interesting thing about music, and with any band, you look at their roots and where they came from, and then you can trace that into how they became their own unique and influential entities. And I definitely think that Neurosis purposely fostered and helped, you know, kind of usher new bands into wider awareness by choosing who they took on tour and choosing who they released records for on Neura. And I think that was a really important conscious move on their part as well. They were very aware that, you know, what they had been built on the network that had supported them coming up. And then when they were in a position to help other bands in a similar way, they did so.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. Coming out of that DIY kind of, you know, San Fran, you know, West Coast kind of punk crust scene, you know. So
yeah, and they never, you know, they never turned their backs on that, and I think that that's admirable because there's certainly been plenty of bands who have achieved similar levels of success and kind of just been content to ride on that without thinking about, you know, where they came from or how they got there. And Neurosis is kind of the opposite, even though they did tours with Pantera and Ozfest and things of higher profile and obviously gained a huge following of their own. They were always very adamant about fostering and sticking to the underground in terms of what they chose to support.
Sure. No, it's a really great point. You brought up tribes earlier. I'm curious, like, you know, with like projects like House of Low Culture and some of those things, is that like where you got the first idea to do things like that, or had you already kind of been in that realm, or was it somebody else's idea? And I'm just kind of curious because Tribes of Neurat was such a weird, at the time when it came out in '96 there, right before Through Silver, that was like a really weird choice for a band to put out these kind of two comparative records, right? Kind of, I don't know, you know what I'm kind of hinting at here? I guess I didn't know if it kind of inspired some of that, or...
Yeah, for sure. As I mentioned, that show I saw of theirs, which must have been around 95 or 96 after the Neurosis set was done, they did probably a half-hour set or maybe more. That was a Tribe set, and that definitely had a big impact on me because it just, I mean, you know, Steve, for instance, dispensed with guitar entirely for a good portion of that set and was just experimenting with mic feedback through the PA and playing drums, and Noah's electronics became a more forefronted part of the presentation, and just seeing the band morph in that way was definitely inspiring for me. And just kind of their willingness to abandon audience expectations and just go where they felt like the music needed to go was also really crucial for me, because it set up this paradigm where you can do what you do and be aware of the fact that people appreciate this sort of core persona that you have, but you can also branch out and extrapolate on these sort of peripheral elements of what you do just for the sake of your own creative impulses. And some of your audience may be willing to follow you and some not, but the important thing is that you're remaining true to your own needs as a musician. And that was definitely inspiring for me. I was able to recognize that you didn't need to just adhere to one thing. And if you had interests that kind of way outside of whatever your main operation was, you could and should and needed to follow those impulses. So, you know, it was, again, in that way, an example of how to live creatively. And then just also talking more stylistically, I did appreciate those noise aspects of what they were doing. And as I mentioned before, that the use of texture and dissonance was very interesting to me. And it kind of overlapped to some degree with their signing to Relapse, and Relapse having that whole release wing of what they were doing. And that was definitely some of my, some of the stuff that I was exposed to because of the connection to Neurosis and because of the connection to Relapse that helped open up a lot of doors for me as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I brought it. Some of our longtime listeners on the podcast know that I talk about like being a sophomore in high school and wandering into the record store that Chris was working in, and he was playing some crazy death metal at the time, and that was I knew Cannibal Corpse and some of that like mainstream stuff in like '95, and I kind of started talking about some things. I went in there to order Tiamat Wild Honey, and he was just looking at this high school kid, again pre-internet, going, how the hell do you know about Tiamat Wild Honey? He was kind of like suspicious of me, like who are you? Because him and Mark were older than me. They graduated when I was in 8th grade, so we actually never were in high school at the same time. But that moment we started talking, I walked out of the record store, and Chris handed me, he's like, here, this is kind of cool. And he handed me the UHF VHF comp that Release and Relapse had put out. I don't know if you remember that. And I went home, and obviously I was paying more attention to the stuff that had the Nuclear Blast and Relapse stuff that was on the thing. But I remember putting on the other one and hearing like Masana and Merzbow, and just as a sophomore trying to like figure it out. I was like, this is really weird. Why are these kind of together? And again, Release didn't have like a gigantic impact on me, but I got into Trial of the Bow and some of these things probably because of Neurosis and because of that comp and because of that relationship that Relapse had with Release. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to hear your take on that, because I had a kind of a different take, but at the same time it was influential,
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely, there were specific things too that I heard about from Neurosis directly that I ended up investigating, Crash Worship being one of them, another band who was incorporating a lot of elements from noise and industrial music, but also coming from a punk background. But the end result was something that was outside any genre boundaries, basically. And so there were things like that along the way that really helped open up my perspective pretty broadly. And there were certain things, of course, I discovered through other avenues, but all of it, kind of filtered through and kind of coincided with this path that Neurosis had been on for years. And in a certain way, all of these different interests that I had seemed to sort of converge under the whole trying to think of what the best way to describe it was. It's almost like Neurosis is the perfect distillation of all these different interests that I had combined in one entity. And it was also like music that I had always wanted to hear and didn't know existed. And then when I finally encountered it, I was like, this is the perfect music. This encapsulates everything that I need at this moment in my life. And I sort of look back on it as, in a certain way, as a potent discovery that's parallel to my first exposure to Metallica, and then before that, my first exposure to Jimi Hendrix. It was almost like that was the trajectory. It was like Hendrix, Metallica, Neurosis, and all those things were like these massive turning points for me as a person and as a musician and as a guitar player.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something like, every metalhead who's like kind of in our age range remembers the first time they heard Metallica. Or I talk to Mark about it sometimes on the cast. Like, I remember being in 6th grade and hearing All Along the Watchtower on the radio, and I just was like stunned. I was just like staring at it. And it was at the time where I would just sit with like a blank cassette, and it would be on record pause, waiting for like stuff on the radio that I wanted to like hear. And it was same with Stairway to Heaven, which again is so innocuous now. Like, you don't even appreciate that song because it's whatever, but it's like you don't know something exists until you know it exists. And so I didn't know Stairway to Heaven existed until I heard it as a 6th grader. And I was like, whoa, what is this? Yeah. And people are like, Stairway to Heaven, dude. Like, you're like, but I just heard it for the first time, and same with Jimi Hendrix and stuff. But it's interesting how there are those bands. And I think, you're right, Neurosis like I remember when I started to expand my interest even a little bit outside of metal and like coming across stuff like, like DJ Shadow introducing and like hearing that and being like, oh, this is like everything I kind of think I like about hip hop, but it's like literally in one place. And, and just kind of having like, again, I didn't go on to be a hip hop artist or anything, but I just remember hearing records where like you felt like those people were into all the same stuff you were into, and you just didn't realize it until you sit and listen to those records. You're like, they're on the same wavelength of like all my weird disparate interests in one place,
Yeah.
And that's cool that Neurosis was that kind of for you in a sense,
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to their earliest contact with them, as I said, listening to Enemy of the Sun was for me an immediately impactful experience, and I remember it distinctly. And then it also kind of set me up for being prepared to receive Through Silver and Blood, which, at that time when it came out, for me, again, was just the perfect record. And while I loved Enemy of the Sun, I felt like Through Silver and Blood was just kind of an escalation of where they had been and a deepening of that vision. And when I heard it, again, it just sounded like the perfect music. And I remember having this experience also while, listening to Metallica in my headphones when I was 12, just thinking like, how did a group of humans come up with music that is so utterly perfect? And that was the same way I felt when I heard Through Silver and Blood. It was like everything was in the place it was meant to be, and it sounded otherworldly, and it was hard to believe that, just a group of people had made this thing.
Yeah, because it almost seems like an exorcism in a sense, like a personal exorcism of all these guys just sort of like getting all of this raw emotion out, and yet it's so still tuneful and listenable. You know what I mean? It's like it's so intense, but yet you're scared by it, but you can't kind of stop listening at the same time almost.
Yeah, and this is more of like a subjective interpretation of what was happening. But for me, the art that has meant the most to me and has impacted me the most is always that which feels like it was something that existed already and has been channeled by a group of people. And that's been kind of my approach to songwriting, is to try to find and form things that I feel like already existed, and it's been up to me to just to act as sort of the conduit for those things. And that was how I felt about Through Silver and Blood. It seemed like it was a manifestation of something almost divine or spiritual. And the group obviously have been careful about not placing any direct religious overtones or ideologies in direct connection to the music, but at the same time, it also seemed to me that it was clear from a listener standpoint that there was something spiritual and ecstatic about what they were doing, and that the process of playing music for them was ritualistic and meditative, and that was also influential for me to think about the fact that you don't just get up there and play your tunes. You get up there in this certain kind of headspace, having prepared yourself for the experience, and you pour every single thing you have into those moments of playing, and you treat it as something sacred. And, I think for a lot of people that could be pretentious or kind of, treating something that a lot of people just consider entertainment as something more than that. But it is that for me, and that is probably another reason why Neurosis and Through Silver and Blood had such an impact, because it was clearly an experience, and it was something that went well beyond just having some tunes to rock out to.
Sure. It's interesting you bring up that word pretentious, because Mark and I, when we were putting some stuff together, we were kind of talking about like Neurosis is one of the rare bands that has earned pretentiousness. And that's not like a backhanded compliment, but it's like some bands, like they can afford to be or come off as pretentious because they've earned it. They put the work in, and they're doing something that is kind of, like you said, at a higher plane musically and intellectually. And it's like Neurosis kind of like, and even I would throw ISIS into that. Like there are some bands that sort of earn that, and so pretentious sometimes comes off as like a negative, but in a sense, like, I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to say here? It's like, it's like it applies to them, yet like they exist outside of the term. You know,
Well,
like they supersede it, I guess.
I think the thing that's interesting is that they obviously take what they do very seriously, and you know, again, that's something that could that could rub certain people the wrong way.
That's true.
At the same time, I feel like there is room for every type of music and every approach to music, and there is a type of experience that people can have as listeners that is completely valid in many different ways.
Yeah.
However, I feel like Neurosis serves a very particular purpose, and part of the reason it's so effective is because they take it so seriously. And I find that, you know, that's true of some other things I've really appreciated, like the Swans, for instance, or Diamanda Galas's early catalog. Like, those are records in which it is clear that the people who have made them are utterly committed, and when they are immersed in their art making, that is the thing to which they have devoted themselves wholly. And I don't think that there's anything pretentious about that. I think it's just an act of devotion to creative output. And for me, that happens to be the best way of going about playing music. I mean, that doesn't apply to everything I've been involved with, but for many of the things that are most crucial and dear to me, I feel like that's the mindset I have to approach it with. And that is certainly something, again, I learned from watching Neurosis. They just, you know, they put every part of their physical, mental, spiritual selves into what they were doing, and that's why the music had such an amazing potency.
Yeah, and I think you're right. So maybe get rid of that term and maybe replace it with something like passionate or something like that. Because I think of like I also teach film. I teach rock and roll history film, and you know, I love like somebody like Andrei Tarkovsky, but like I also understand like to some people that's going to come off as right. It has a certain tone to it, but like to me, like he's doing the same thing with film that like say a band like Neurosis is doing or whatever, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's some people aren't into that either. You know, like I think for some people, Neurosis and maybe some of the bands you've been involved in are too raw, or they're too primal, or they're just going to like some places that not everybody's comfortable going all the time musically, you know, or from an art aesthetic, you know.
Yep, I understand that, and you know, that's again going back to what I was talking about, how
there's a place for
there's a place for everything. But for me, you know, there are times when I want music to just function as a source of entertainment or something to, you know, to kind of ramp up my energy level and you know, dance around the house with my kid or whatever while we're making dinner. But then there's also this need that I have for music to, you know, dig into the deepest elements of inner exploration and meaning of life and the connectivity of human experience. And that's, to me, where music takes on another level and another depth.
Absolutely. I had somebody, when we were putting together our show a few years back for the thing that never sets, I had a friend of mine who's also a teacher who is not a metal head at all. She listens to country music. And we were just kind of chatting, and I was like talking to her about putting together this show. And I said, I was listening to this record when I was driving from visiting my parents back home. It was like a 2.5 hour drive. So I listened to some that never sets like twice. And I was telling her how I got to this one song called Falling Unknown. And I almost had like an experience. Like I was overwhelmed emotionally. And she was like, what? Like, that's weird. And I said, yeah, just do yourself a favor. I said, go on your own, find a room away from your kids and your husband and put this on headphones and just tell me what you think. I mean, it's not music you're going to like that much. And she called me back up a few minutes later after, 14 minutes later, whatever. And she's like, I actually cried. And I was like, awesome. You know, you're not a Neurosis person. I mean, awesome. And like it got you. And I was like, that's what I kind of get out of music sometimes. And not everybody gets that, you know, as you said, people listen for different reasons, but, it's like they can take you there if you want to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think that can, again, cross many different genres. I mean, I feel like Marvin Gaye record, What's Going On, is just as heavy as Through Silver and Blood in an entirely different way. But again, I feel like that's an artist who's digging very deeply into themselves and is, working to provide something that's a very unified vision. So again, those are the kind of
something like that. Yeah,
those are
digging in. Yeah,
yeah, and those are the things that always appeal to me the most. Whether whatever the genre or cross genres are that the people may be working in, it's when the people who are making it have fully committed themselves that they're able to, I believe, tap into something that really resonates for those who are willing to also spend the time to connect with it.
Sure. So I guess as we kind of wrap up here, one kind of final kind of thought on this, I guess, from a macro perspective is, I guess you've talked about it at a personal level, but where do you see this as somebody that's been in the metal or the harder realm of music for a few decades? What's the legacy of or impact of Through Silver, you think, today, kind of looking back on it?
I mean, I can trace that in so many bands that have shaped the modern metal landscape. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I've never had this confirmed for me, but I can't help but wonder now, thinking about the Sepultura record Roots, if they hadn't been listening to some Neurosis. And I especially wonder now because it's clear that at least the brothers in that band, the Cavalera brothers, were always interested in underground music. And so, that was a record that clearly changed metal in very many ways, and some good, some bad.
Some bad, yeah, absolutely.
But it really brought about a whole new shift in music, and I wondered whether Through Silver and Blood was part of, what set them off in that direction. I mean, clearly they had their roots in, more traditional Brazilian music as well, but just the overall
almost the confidence to do something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or just like the idea of combining what they already had in their background in a new way. And just the timing of it, I couldn't help but wonder if that was part of where that came from. But then also thinking about bands like Mastodon, for instance, who clearly have moved in a very different direction than Neurosis. But that band has become massively influential in a lot of ways, and I know for a fact that those guys have been heavily influenced by Neurosis.
Oh, sure.
Toured with them. Scott Kelly's been on a bunch of their records, and I know from having spoken to them that was a big part of their musical DNA. Same goes for ISIS, and I'm hesitant to say what our impact has been on a broader scale, but I could certainly think of at least a handful of bands who seem to sort of follow in our wake and Neurosis as well, and have become influential bands in their own right. So, I mean, just thinking back to some of the last few times I saw Neurosis and seeing how many people were there, literally thousands of people coming to see Neurosis, whereas the first time I saw them, there was maybe 150 people at that show in Boston in 96 or whatever it was. So it's not necessarily to say that audience size indicates the importance of a band, but at the same time, Neurosis has been touring for multiple decades now and still continue to draw lots of people, and you'll see in their audience there's a contingent of people who are, in their 40s and 50s, all the way down to people who are new fans of the band. So their legacy is not stuck in the past. But I will say that I look back on Through Silver and Blood as the band that kind of just launched them from this underground, very cult level band to this massively influential band that has now touched the mainstream in a variety of ways, and also continued to propagate a bunch of other bands and musicians and labels in the underground. And Through Silver and Blood, in a certain way, I think is also a unifying record. I mean, there's a lot of people who will, disavow certain parts of Neurosis's catalog, but Through Silver and Blood seems to be one of maybe a couple of their records that is an absolute unifier amongst their fans, and also a unifier amongst people who are, inhabiting very different circles. There's a lot of people who like Neurosis who don't like anything else that has come from this world. So in that way, they've touched a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and I think that's another testimony to the strength of their music and to the strength of that record.
This is Dan Lake, Decibel contributor and author of USBM, A Revolution of Identity in American Black Metal. I'll make a bit of a disclaimer here. I'm as devoted a Neurosis fan as you're likely to find, but I wasn't listening back in 96 when Through Silver and Blood was released. I wasn't listening in 99 for Times of Grace. But Neurosis were a foundational metal band for me. I guess around 2001, 2002, I was still kind of hanging out in the doorway of metal with bands like Faith No More and Tool. I hadn't really committed to liking metal, but I think, if I remember correctly, I bought Oceanic by the band Isis in 2003, just because Mike Patton had released it on his Ipecac Recordings label. So I kind of fell in love with that record, slowly, admittedly. But I had read some review that said that Isis's music was some amalgamation of Converge and Neurosis. And so through that, I kind of cast my net a little wider, and that's how I found Jane Doe and Through Silver and Blood, which, as an aside, it's kind of mind-blowing now for me to think in retrospect that these three records, Oceanic and Jane Doe and Through Silver and Blood, were kind of my true entry into metal. There's some great records, all three of them. But so, like, all these bands were, like, a big deal to me at the time. But that Neurosis record, picking up Through Silver and Blood without having ever heard Neurosis before, that record turned me inside out. I think the first thing, because, I open up the CD and I put the thing in to start listening, but it's the visuals that get to me first. The CD had this image of this kind of indiscernible collection of bones, and the booklet has all these bright, weird, abstract lo-fi images with the lyrics on them in these kind of scrawled out, almost like block letter with shadows. It's a really interesting visual style. And plus the lyrics had all the, it was all this kind of opaque confrontational poetry that I couldn't understand. And then, then the first song starts, and it's that mechanized opening, but then with the tribal drums, it's mysterious. It's not even particularly in your face for a while, which is part of its allure, I think. Then, that song, that title track just kind of blows up into something amazing. And then you get Rehumanize, which is this whole new, non-musical dimension that I guess gets picked up again later on with Become the Ocean. But then the songs themselves are all these, massive, crazy layers of music swirling around, but they all work together somehow. There's this kind of symbiosis where each part kind of props up the others. It's incredibly complex, and it's hard to see how they fit it all together so perfectly. Anyway, this was all totally different from what I had been hearing before. Sure, Isis, had these long and heavy songs, but none of that was anything close to the kind of chaos, the stuff that was as primal as what Neurosis were doing. In the context of other Neurosis records, Through Silver and Blood is kind of this difficult apex for them. They kind of emerged from their first record and kind of their second record as kind of a hardcore punk band, but they were moving towards something kind of more elemental during that process of making Souls at Zero. that record, Souls at Zero, is a brilliant attempt at kind of exploding the hardcore spirit out into new musical terrain. Then, like, they had Enemy of the Sun, which was supposed to be an EP, but again, kind of the band's, like, outsized ambitions blew that all out of proportion, and it's amazing also, so it's great. And then Through Silver and Blood is kind of this peak. It's almost like they were pushing themselves, flogging themselves to climb up this mountain. They were touring themselves to death. They were writing and performing this music that, constantly laid them open and raw night after night. It's like they took it as their mission to channel some kind of like personal awakening in devastation for each person who attended their shows, and that kind of duty, that kind of mission it must be totally draining for the people involved. It was too much. I mean, they've said as much. They've said that period was just too much. They had to find some way to back off and allow their own humanity to have some space inside all of their music. And that's, I think, what they did later on. Through Silver and Blood is this, like, almost horribly perfect moment when the guys in Neurosis kind of surrendered, like, who they were, their flesh, their emotional and spiritual makeup, kind of for their audience, almost to feed on. And that situation wasn't healthy. It wasn't sustainable in any kind of long-term way. It's kind of a miracle that the band even survived past it to do other things, to last this long. I know that there are some people who feel like later records by Neurosis just don't have the same kind of impact. I will always disagree. I think that things like A Sun That Never Sets, Given to the Rising, even like The Eye of Every Storm, like, these are journeys that I will always go on over and over again. I think it's selfish to expect that a band should kind of continually consume itself so that you feel satisfied with the art you're listening to.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel Lake, for your kind comments there. Author recently of the U.S. Black Metal.
Yes.
Decibel author and fellow teacher. So we're in the trenches together.
Math teacher?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
We were chatting a couple weeks ago when he sent me this testimonial.
Oh, two thankless jobs. Author and teacher.
Yeah, exactly. Woo-hoo.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Yep.
I feel you.
Yep. If you call this a job, then I have a thankless teacher / unpaid podcaster.
I mean, everything I really care about. No, the thing that I do some handyman shit for people when I need money that I can't get from art, and that's unfortunately the thing that people most commission me for.
Yeah, sure.
But it's, I don't know. It's, at least it's stuff you care about.
Yep.
Like you're not doing a job that you want to just fucking kill yourself about. So
sure.
I've slowly kind of just figured out how to live my life in a very simple, cheap way that is kind of in tune with my. And
yet at the same time, you still, can get some records and different things like that, and find a kind of a balance and stuff.
But I don't have children. I don't have an extravagant lifestyle. I have a 12-year-old car. I've got a 12-year-old dog.
Yep.
Like you don't need a lot. Like I'm more. If I was a millionaire, I would have a modest house and just an incredible record collection.
Yeah, same. Yeah, exactly.
Probably the same car I have right now.
I'd have a lot more like. Action figures or just stupid dumb shit like that.
Whims, I would
go exactly.
But hey, you want that giant size X-Men? Hey, I got it for you, buddy.
There we go. Yeah, if anybody has giant size X-Men #1 that's listening and would like to donate it as you'd be the ultimate
right
Patreon.
Off on your taxes.
Yeah, you'd be the ultimate patron. I'd let you pick. I'd convince Mark to let you pick the topic of a future episode.
Oh, sure,
hands down.
Sure.
So Fuck, well, if
give
you
me,
just want us to talk about
Snake
X-Men for
Eyes,
2 hours, we'll
or
do
give
it.
me G.I. Joe Silent Interlude. That's the only thing
Is that
I
what
need.
you need?
Yeah.
Is that?
It's G.I. Joe 21, I think.
So just 21 is like the hard to find?
That's the expensive one. Everything else I could find at a show at some point,
Yeah.
but that's the one that got stupidly expensive.
What's it run for now?
It can
Probably.
go anywhere from like $30 to $75.
Got it.
Which it used to be a quarter or 10 cents. And I've got a graphic novel version, but I'd like the
That was
floppy.
me. I just finally picked up X-Men number 94, which is the first new team in the actual comic after Giant Size, and that was some Patreon money.
These are
that was beyond Patreon money.
These are. I mean, we don't buy sports cars. We're
No.
buying stuff to enrich our lives.
Well, to be fair, for people that think, wow, that's pretty economically irresponsible of you, I just refied my house. And when you refi your house, you get a couple months or a month off of mortgage payments.
Depending on what month.
Yeah, and I lucked out because I did it at the end of December, so I got January and February off. So I said, it's now or never. If I'm gonna
I only get March off.
If I'm gonna, you're doing your refi as well. So, but we're on our way out here, and I guess as we sort of close off this very interesting journey, which we hope you've enjoyed over the past couple episodes, which are clearly epic and long, and lots of things going on. We hope you appreciate the insight that. We'd like to thank people like Steve and Noah and Aaron and Bill for doing kind of actual sort of mini interviews or real long interviews. And then everybody else that sent in, contributions. That was fantastic.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
I know the band appreciates that.
This is all kind of quick too. I mean, it was all within a couple weeks, so we appreciate the experience.
Yeah, I remember finally calling you and being like, "Okay, so here's what I'm up to here," because I wanted to see if there was any.
This is the most we've talked to each other on the phone in a long time.
I know.
I called you last night about.
Okay, let's break this shit down. Yeah, but I was like, I could text Mark this, but like, I just need to explain it to him. So I talked to Elbert
each other on the
and
phone
this is,
more as a race of human beings.
I agree. Just the only people I talked to my mom on the phone, and
I talked to my mom and dad, and I talked to Chris.
Yeah, I talked to Chris. Yep. And I talked to Luke, but I guess it's through Facebook Messenger phone.
Still, it's a phone analog.
But he lives in Taiwan, so that's why.
Yeah, you don't want it.
He's also a patron.
Do long distance.
So thanks, Luke. Enclosure and Flame, or in Flames, it's plural. I just said, and maybe it was because I was exhausted at the point where I took notes on this. I just said, this is pure fucking pain. The screams are downright scary because of how raw this really gets. It's disarming. It kind of fades in and out of these kind of harrowing, quiet moments to full-throated catharsis. Is there a movie equivalent to a song like this where you just feel like beaten up? I told you about that movie Come and See, that sort of Russian war film that is fucking harrowing. I was thinking of it in cinematic terms where I've encountered something like this. Last House on the Left.
The Descent.
The Descent, maybe. Yeah.
Where she comes out covered in blood.
Yeah.
Out of a thing of bones. Like it's kind of like a mythical journey, really.
I guess I can handle The Descent more than this. I mean, I like this song. It's really interesting.
You ever seen
and
Martyrs?
Fascinating. You told me about that. Okay. I've heard of it. It's got a reputation. I think it's on my it's on my checklist.
We should. So. I'll find a way to get it. We can watch it together. It's one of those movies where I'm not going to go off in too much. But it's something that throws a lot of things out there, but it lets you fill in a lot of make it kind of like better. The greater imagination you have.
Gotcha.
Like they show some stuff and you're just like, fuck. You're like, oh, but
wow.
But what happens after? Yeah. Like I could have, what I wanted or what I imagined as the kind of ending is better than what I think they would have intended if they showed a real ending.
Gotcha.
So
interesting. Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff
I've heard a lot of interesting things about that. So I don't know what your reaction was to this song. To me, this is the most raw, open, the screams that these guys do in this song, they're not the kind of screams that I get in Locust Star and I kind of want to sing along to. It's like, I don't know.
There's another quote that I don't remember what this is from. I don't know if it's from the Decibel thing or this is just something else I found, but this is something that it might have been from the Decibel thing. Hall of Fame from Landis, that we weren't just trying to write songs or trying to channel something. And that's something I don't think that was addressed much in our interview. Maybe the sentiment was, but that's kind of like the takeaway from this whole thing is it's about the emotional catharsis of the whole thing. It's not about just, this wasn't what an album as a piece of something to make money from.
No, this is an album they had to make.
Yeah. And at the time I didn't understand the kind of like weight of that. And now I'm starting to understand them better.
Yeah. I mean, Roeder says in the Decibel, Hall of Fame on this, it's easily the angriest record we've ever made. I mean, this song is just angry.
I've got a Scott Kelly quote that there's a feeling on that record that goes beyond anything we did before or since.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the song, So if it's kind of new to you, like if you don't love Enclosure in Flames, like don't feel bad. It's like, it's not a song I return to very often. Whereas I
only listen to this album as a whole. I never pull out songs.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like
I think that's important with Neurosis.
I'm like a 70s album guy.
Yeah.
Like I like to hear the whole thing, but like I think in Neurosis in general, that's kind of that's preferred way.
Sure.
You're not going to go listen to Fire Within Fire Side 2 and start, you're going to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah. There's some truth to that too. So it's probably in the sequence of things, the song that needed to be there after something like Aeon.
I think it's a perfectly sequenced record.
Yeah, for sure.
And
we even asked about that, the sequencing and stuff like that. So, I think it's that we've said what we said. I think there's probably more that could be said about this, and others have said that. There's a lot of really great content that's out there that unpacks this record. What
makes us great is that you can keep talking about it.
And I think what we've tried to do, as we kind of explained in part one, is just take a different angle a little bit and try to, give you our perspective, obviously, but also try and bring in the band and their perspective and others who have been touched by the band. And
like a historical perspective, I don't think has really been out there before.
Yeah. And that was
not to the extent that this was.
No. And I think that's something we could, bring to the table. And again, we hope you appreciated it. And so if you did, shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com and let us know. Give us feedback on this issue. I'm thinking like I'm a journalist again, Mark. Yeah.
We still are.
Because I was doing interviews.
This is more journalistic than most journalism that we see on television right now.
Exactly. So, but I think again, shoot us an email, let us know, feedback, like good, the bad, the ugly on these episodes.
And if you'd like to give us a short audio clip, we'd love to put it on the show.
Yeah.
Just keep it under a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Be as succinct as possible. We'd love to put those kind of clips on. I think people dig it, and I think we dig hearing that as well.
Sure. And speaking of which, I think I'd be remiss, Brian, who helped me cultivate the first part and is also a patron and does the History Heavy Metal Spotify for us. He wrote me a little something. I'll acknowledge it because he had kind of play like a singular role in helping with stuff. He says, I don't know that I have any insights on Through Silver and Blood that aren't pretty obvious to anyone who has listened to the album. I had heard about Neurosis for years, but didn't actually delve into listening to them until Through Silver and Blood had been around for a decade and was already considered a classic. When I finally got my hands on a copy and listened to it, it was just as groundbreaking as I had been told. I can say as someone whose formative years were shaped more by Black Flag, The Birthday Party, and Swans than, say, Iron Maiden or Metallica, that this is a record that feels designed to appeal to someone like me, without ever feeling contrived or mimicking things that came before. The tribal drumming, the swirling feedback, and the shouted vocals build tension that gives ways to absolutely crushing riffs. I don't play this album as often as I should because it demands so much from me, but every time I do, I get more from it. The music is dark, yet uplifting and even spiritual. I wish I had discovered Through Silver and Blood sooner. This is music that belongs in my life.
Well, that basically just summed up our 8.5-hour episode in a nice succinct sentence.
That's it. And I think he kind of says it best that it's maybe not a record I feel comfortable visiting as much as I should because of how raw and real it is. But when I do, I get something out of it.
I think it's like when you want to do mushrooms. You do it once every couple of years. You have a great time, and then you put it away.
There you go. There you go. That should be our sponsorship right there.
Brought to you by Magic
Brought
Mushrooms.
to you by fucking mushrooms. Yeah. I think if there's any 2 episodes that we've done in recent times, if the thrash metal didn't get you, it's got to be these, I hope, that could initiate you to become a Patreon and say, wow, these motherfuckers put a lot of work in.
We do it for the love of the work.
We do.
As Neurosis do. They don't do it for the money.
That
we
is
do
true.
this for the love of
We
the
suffered
music.
for you guys. When I joke on Facebook and stuff that we're suffering, we are. I mean, this took a lot of work.
I don't feel like I suffered at all, though. I feel enriched.
Yeah, I mean suffering in like a good exercise session or something like that. Like I'm going to be healthier on the other end, obviously, and stuff. But yeah, so shoot us or go to patreon.com/Requiem podcast and sign up to be a patron, and you can get access to bonus episodes. We did 3 bonus episodes just for the Thrash series alone. Those are things that only Patreons can get at this point. So Heathen, Flotsam and Jetsam, and Devastation.
Yeah,
I believe so.
And if you're there, I know there are some people out there that don't want to do the patron thing just for whatever reason.
Yeah.
If you ever want to some people have just got a hold of us to do a one-time donation.
To do a PayPal donation.
And yeah, if you ever want to do that, just
something like
get a hold
that.
of us, and we'd gladly take that. We appreciate that.
Yeah, shoot us an email and we'll shoot you back. The Venmo does a nice QR code that they can send. It's really easy.
That'll go right back to making the economy grow, because it's going to go right into Discogs orders.
I was going to say Discogs, Amazon, different things that books, whatever, research kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So Cult Never Dies, where I got those Terrorizer issues and stuff.
Somebody make a fucking U.S. store for that guy. Come on, man.
It's really bad.
When I was buying stuff when the pound was down, it was great, but now this is it's a kick in the dick.
The pound's always pounding your ass, man. Trust me. When I lived in England, it was brutal. I went broke way quicker there. So, but yeah, or you can go to our website, Requiem Podcast or requiemmetal.com. And you can click on Patreon there, or you can listen to our first 160 episodes. So we do appreciate it. Mark, it's been a hell of a journey. I've learned something about myself, I think, and I've learned something about Neurosis. And so hopefully the rest of everybody else did.
Well, we've been doing this since 3:30 today, and it's 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
So that's how much we care.
Pierced the veil there.
Yeah.
That's something. So here we go. We're going to end with Enclosure in Flames from the album Through Silver and Blood. Perhaps you've heard of it. And for Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And I'm Art.